I am a linguist. Linguists study language, and we do this in a lot of different ways. Some linguists study how we pronounce certain sounds. Others look at how we build sentences. And some study how language varies from place to place, just to name a few. But what I'm really interested in is what people think and believe about language, and how these beliefs affect the way we use it. All of us have deeply held beliefs about language, such as the belief that some languages are more beautiful than others, or that some ways of using language are more correct. And as most linguists know, these beliefs are often less about language itself and more about what we believe about the social world around us.
A few years ago, a stranger sitting next to me on a plane asked what I did for a living. I told him that I'm an archaeologist and I study the ancient Maya. He said, "Wow, I love archaeology," and told me how excited he gets when hearing about new finds. Then he told me how amazing it is that aliens from the planet Nibiru had come to Earth and established the ancient Sumerian culture in Mesopotamia. I have these conversations a lot. On planes, in bookstores, and in bars, people want to talk with me about pseudo-archaeology, something that seems like archaeology, but isn't. It involves making wild and unproven claims about the human past. Things like aliens built the pyramids, or survivors from the lost continent of Atlantis invented hieroglyphic writing.
I shared a little bit about myself in my traditional languages of Southern Shoshone and Tlingit. I continue to learn who we are as Yukon First Nations people. We are a people that deeply value, honor, and respect the roles of women. We always have. We're a matrilineal culture. And so, traditionally, our matriarchs would often guide and direct the speakers of the people, otherwise known as the chiefs. This important role of forging trade relationships, forging marriage alliances, and ensuring that all of the business that needed to take place in the community was happening was all guided and directed by our matriarchs. I definitely continue to see the ways in which we lead here in the Yukon not quite being aligned nationally. What do I mean by that? Well, to be clear, misogyny and patriarchy are definitely not reflective of who we are as Yukon First Nations or of the traditional structures and the ways in which we respect women in decision-making.
I've been doing some research into some of the fine print and all the different things in our Constitution that we never talk about. And I've discovered some legal loopholes that shocked me, I guarantee will shock you, and could determine the way that the presidential election in 2020 turns out. For instance, did you know that under our Constitution, a presidential candidate could actually lose the popular vote, fail to get a majority in the Electoral College, refuse to concede, manipulate hidden mechanisms in our government, and still get sworn in as the President of the United States of America? That's a true fact. I know it sounds like some crazy House of Cards episode, and I wish it was, because then we could just change the channel, but I just described to you a real world, real life possibility that could occur this year, the year I'm talking, in 2020, or in some other year if we don't fix some of these glitches in our system.
It was a cold, sunny March day. I was walking along the street in Riga. I remember the winter was slowly coming to an end. There was still some snow around here and there, but the pavement was already clear and dry. If you've lived in Riga, you'll know that feeling of relief that the first signs of spring bring, and you no longer have to trudge through that slushy mix of snow and mud on the streets. So there I am, enjoying my stroll, as I suddenly notice a stencil on the pavement in front of me, a graffiti. White letters painted on these dark gray bricks. It says, "Where is your responsibility?" The question stopped me in my tracks.
The most astounding place I've ever been is the Mosquito Rainforest in Honduras. I've done archaeological fieldwork all over the world, so I thought I knew what to expect, venturing into the jungle, but I was wrong. For the first time in my life, I might add. First of all, it's freezing. It's 90 degrees, but you're soaking wet from the humidity. And the canopy of trees is so thick that sunlight never reaches the surface. You can't get dry. Immediately, I knew that I hadn't brought enough clothing. That first night, I kept feeling things moving underneath my hammock. Unknown creatures brushing and poking against the thin nylon fabric. And I could barely sleep through all the noise. The jungle is loud. It's shockingly loud. It's like being downtown in a bustling city.
In 2008, I got an unusual phone call from a guy named Joe Graydon. Joe said he was getting flooded with complaints from patients who'd recently been switched to generic drugs. Joe was a trained pharmacologist and co-host of a radio show on NPR. Patient after patient said their generics were causing unwelcome side effects or even relapses. Joe believed the patient's claims. But when he reported these complaints to the FDA, officials there argued it was probably psychosomatic. Patients are upset by pills that look different from their old ones. Joe didn't buy it. He wanted someone with investigative firepower to dig into this. And since I was an investigative journalist, he called me. And then he posed a question that I couldn't get out of my head. Catherine, what is wrong with the drugs?
In my lab, we're using the tools of artificial intelligence and synthetic biology to speed up the fight against this pandemic. Our work was originally designed to tackle the antibiotic resistance crisis. Our project seeks to harness the power of machine learning to replenish our antibiotic arsenal and avoid a globally devastating post-antibiotic era. Importantly, the same technology can be used to search for antiviral compounds that could help us fight the current pandemic. Machine learning is turning the traditional model of drug discovery on its head. With this approach, instead of painstakingly testing thousands of existing molecules one by one in a lab for their effectiveness, we can train a computer to explore the exponentially larger space of essentially all possible molecules that could be synthesized. And thus, instead of looking for a needle in a haystack, we can use the giant magnet of computing power to find many needles in multiple haystacks simultaneously.
In the future, self-driving cars will be safer and more reliable than humans. But for this to happen, we need technologies that allow cars to respond faster than humans. We need algorithms that can drive better than humans. And we need cameras that can see more than humans can see. For example, imagine a self-driving car is about to make a blind turn, and there's an oncoming car, or perhaps there's a child about to run into the street. Fortunately, our future car will have this superpower, a camera that can see around corners to detect these potential hazards. For the past few years as a PhD student in the Stanford Computational Imaging Lab, I've been working on a camera that can do just this, a camera that can image objects hidden around corners or blocked from direct line of sight.
$13.8 billion years ago, the universe as we know it began with a big bang, and everything that we know and are made of was created. 50,000 years ago, our brains underwent a major genetic mutation, which resulted in the biological reorganization of the brain. Some scientists call this the Big Brain Bang. Others call it the Great Leap Forward, which I prefer. It's so much more poetic. This is when Homo sapiens began to evolve into the modern species that we are today. The Great Leap Forward activated most of our modern abilities: abstract thought, planning, cooking, competitive labor, language, art, music, and self-decoration.
And once we're inside this shared reality, debate also requires that we separate ideas from the identity of the person discussing them. So in formal debate, nothing is a topic unless it is controversial, that we should raise the voting age, outlaw gambling. But the debaters don't choose their sides. So that's why it makes no sense to do what 10-year-old Julia did. Attacking the identity of the person making the argument is irrelevant because they didn't choose it. Your only winning strategy is to engage with the best, clearest, least personal version of the idea.
Actually, let me show you how to do that. Would you all like to stand up for a moment? I'm going to show you the 6 vocal warm-up exercises that I do before every talk I ever do. Anytime you're going to talk to anybody important, do these. First, arms up, deep breath in, and sigh out, like that. One more time. Very good. Now we're going to warm up our lips, and we're going to go bop, 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 bop. Very good. And now, just like when you were a kid. Now your lips should be coming alive. We're going to do the tongue next with exaggerated la, 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 la. Beautiful. You're getting really good at this. And then roll an R. That's like champagne for the tongue. Finally, and if I can only do one, the pros call this the siren. It's really good. It starts with we and goes to or. The we is high, the or is low. So you go wee, or wee.
Six months ago, I watched with bated breath as NASA's InSight lander descended towards the surface of Mars. 200 meters, 80 meters, 60, 40, 20, 17 meters. Receiving confirmation of successful touchdown was one of the most ecstatic moments of my life. And hearing that news was possible because of 2 small CubeSats that went along to Mars with InSight. Those 2 CubeSats essentially live-streamed InSight's telemetry back to Earth so that we could watch in near real time as that InSight lander went screaming towards the surface of the red planet, hitting the atmosphere of Mars at a top speed of about 12,000 miles per hour. Now, that event was live-streamed to us from over 90 million miles away. It was live-streamed from Mars.
I'm a protein designer, and I'd like to discuss a new type of medicine. It's made from a molecule called a constrained peptide. There are only a few constrained peptide drugs available today, but there are a lot that will hit the market in the coming decade. So let's explore what these new medicines are made of, how they're different, and what's causing this incoming tidal wave of new and exciting medicines. Constrained peptides are very small proteins. They've got extra chemical bonds that constrain the shape of the molecule, and this makes them incredibly stable, as well as highly potent. They're naturally occurring. Our bodies actually produce a few of these that help us to combat bacterial, fungal, and viral infections. And animals like snakes and scorpions use constrained peptides in their venom.
If you've ever hosted a mouse as a house guest, you know they can be incredibly clever at finding your food. And that makes sense.
They had to become better in traits like problem solving because we became better at hiding our food from them.
Anja Guntar is with the Max Planck Institute in Germany. She says that battle of the minds has made mice craftier over time.
The longer the mice live with humans, the better they are at problem solving.
You see, there are more than a dozen subspecies of house mice worldwide, and each began cohabitating with humans at different times in our evolutionary history. One of those difficult birds is the critically endangered regent honeyeater. They're medium-sized songbirds with bright yellow tails and black and white chests. And though they once roamed Australia in flocks of hundreds, fewer than 300 remain in the wild today. Kreitz and his team tracked the birds over a 5-year period. If they encountered a male, they'd record his song. And they noted whether the males were paired up with females. They found that a quarter of the birds sang variations of the traditional honeyeater song, and 12% of the birds weren't singing honeyeater songs at all. They were parroting different species songs, like this. Or this one. That could mean bad news for the bird's future, because males singing those untraditional songs were also less likely to be paired up with a mate compared to their counterparts who sang the standard tune.
It isn't clear why or how the poop shield works, but Madela suspects that there must be some chemical inside the poop, presumably derived from the plants that the animals originally ate, that either actively repels the hornets or camouflages the scent of the bees' nests. American bees don't do this. Asian honeybees are a different species than the Western honeybees in Europe and North America.
I just can't even totally capture how much fun it really was to do this work. I didn't have a lot of personal experience with Asian bees, and so meeting them was kind of like meeting the crazy cousin of the bees you know really well. These bees are a lot smaller, but they're very, very fast and very reactive. And that's because of the kind of hornet pressure that they've evolved under. They have evolved to fly quite quickly in zigzagging patterns as they're approaching their nest so that they're very hard to catch.
When AI processes images of the world in the form of pixels, it does not know which changes should count and which should be ignored. For instance, a slight change in the pattern of the clouds in the sky in a game environment is probably unimportant when exploring said game. But finding a missing key certainly is. But to the AI, both involve changing a few pixels in that world. This is where deep reinforcement learning comes in. It's an area of machine learning that helps an agent analyze an environment to decide what matters and which actions count through feedback signals in the form of extrinsic and intrinsic rewards.
This is something that animals basically constantly do. You can imagine if you touch a hot stove, you immediately get a strong negative feedback signal like, hey, that's something you shouldn't do in the future. If you eat a bar of chocolate, assuming you like chocolates, you immediately get a positive feedback signal like, hey, maybe I should seek out chocolate more in the future. The same is true for machine learning. These are problems where the agent has to take some actions and then maybe it wins a game.
Skechers earlier this year became the #2 footwear brand in the country, surpassing Adidas. This was a big deal. And in the 12 months ending June, Skechers' net income was $209 million. That means that Nike's customers make almost twice as much profit as their closest competitor. How's that even possible? The sneaker market is just supply and demand. But Nike has gotten very good at using supply, limited sneakers, and the distribution of those sneakers to their own benefit. So it's really just supply. Sneakerheads joke as long as it's limited and Nike, they'll buy it. Shoes that sell for $8,000 do so because they're very rare. It's no different than any other collectible market. Only, this isn't a market at all. It's a false construct created by Nike, ingeniously created by Nike in the most positive sense, to sell more shoes.
This is a lump of coal. It was mined a while ago in the Ruhr region of Germany, about 50 miles from where I grew up. As coal goes, it's actually quite high-end. It's very dry, has a high share of carbon in it. Both those things mean you can't only burn it to produce power and heat, but you can use it to make steel. Now, why am I telling you this? By the end of this talk, I want to have convinced you that we can make a huge step forward in the great fight against climate change by just spending 1 to 2% more on things that we buy. And the path of this coal is going to help me with it. But back to steel. What you have to know about steel making is that it's a humblingly brutal process. You have these huge furnaces that tear apart and recombine elements and materials that have literally been around for millions of years at temperatures of up to more than 2000 degrees Celsius.